it's obvious that Boris Johnson is trying to put the thumbscrews on possible rebel MPs. So essentially saying to his possible rebels that, you know, we're very, very close to a no-deal Brexit cliff edge, and if they want to play around, if they want to try and, you know, chum up with the opposition and try and frustrate any possible no-deal Brexit, then there isn't that much time.
Tom, after 18 months of pretty defensive mode from Number 10, this is just outright aggression, isn't it?
Well, it's a decisive move, and for the first time it's Number 10 showing that they actually are going to be engaged in this tug of war, if you like. It's Number 10 saying that we're not just going to sit back and let Remainers ride roughshod over the Constitution in the way that they've done with sort of unprecedented bills over the last few months, you know, forcing through legislation over the course of a day, seizing the order paper from the government. This is the sort of unprecedented
In which case,
stuff
why treat people
Remainers
like fools and say it's nothing to do with Brexit?
Well, I think it's two things. Firstly, of course, there is a bit of it that is to do with Brexit, but it's not all to do with Brexit.
All of your first answer was to do with Brexit, and the critics say, look at this, it is exactly what you think it is, which is an opportunity to shut down all of those manoeuvres we were hearing from the opposition party yesterday.
Well, I think it's both. It's certainly not the sort of prorogation that we were hearing about months ago, the sort of prorogation right over the edge of that 31st of October deadline. There is still time for Parliament to debate, to discuss, to legislate.
Dawn, do you think there's
before
still
and
time?
after.
There is a very, very small amount of time, and I think that pressure is exactly what Boris Johnson wants to put upon his possible MPs. I think that essentially Boris Johnson is trying to force the Conservatives to get behind any possible deal. I think he'll probably end up with very, very little change from Theresa May's deal, and he's essentially trying to get them behind that before Halloween.
Do you think it was a tacit admission after yesterday, with the opposition parties saying, look, we're going to try to legislate against a no deal, that he acknowledges in part that he would possibly have lost that vote if there was to be a vote?
Yes, absolutely. I think the sudden fact that the Lib Dems and Labour and all the opposition parties have started working together put the fear factor into the Conservatives, and this is a way of completely frustrating that, just to try and get Brexit through before Halloween.
But it shows that the executive isn't impotent. There are things that the executive can do to ensure that that mandate from the people is finally fulfilled.
Do you agree with what Tim Shipman from the Sunday Times said, that he thought in part it could be Boris Johnson deliberately provoking the various opposition and those rebel Conservative MPs to go for that vote of confidence, because he can see the fragmentation that exists in that particular political area?
It's saying put up or shut up. We heard that this coalition of politicians against the people yesterday came together to say actually what they'd rather do is a legislative route. It's saying, no, we're not going to give you so much all the time in the world to pursue this. Either you take us out of power, you install the possibility of Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister, the most unpopular leader of the opposition in the history of this country, becoming Prime Minister, or you back this government and the promise that actually the majority of MPs gave to the people when they voted for Article 50.
Dawn Foster, is there a counter-argument that actually perhaps the opposition was rather fragmented? This actually gives them something to coalesce around?
I think so, absolutely, and I think what we've seen in the last week is the opposition finally getting together and saying that no deal is something that they completely stand against, even though a lot of Labour MPs actually do back Brexit. The opposition essentially are now coalesced together against no deal, and I think Boris Johnson has to decide whether to push for no deal or actually stand back and look at what the EU have said, which is that the only reason they would ever extend the period is for a general election.
The other option, well, you bring us to the general election. I want to talk to Tom about that. Do you think we've got closer to a general election, given the polls apart nature of the dialogue with the EU? We know what the situation is with a potential no confidence vote. Does that all bring us to a point where a lot of analysts have said Boris Johnson actually wants an election, to frame it in terms of, I want to bring you Brexit and these are the people that are blocking me? Well, is that the bigger strategy of what is going on here?
No one that I've spoken to in Number 10 wants an election before that Brexit deadline. What the Conservative Party, what Boris Johnson wants to do is get Brexit done, and then there is that possibility of having an election perhaps before or just after Christmas. And don't forget, Boris Johnson, in most recent polls, has a 10-point lead above the Labour Party. It's much more attractive to have an election now for the Conservative Party than any other party.
Just a final couple of points. Dawn, to you first of all. There'll be those members sitting in cabinet. Matt Hancock is one, Amber Rudd is another, who said some pretty straightforward things about prorogation in the past. Matt Hancock said it goes against everything that those men who waded onto the beaches, he was talking in the commemorations after the Second War, were fighting for. Amber Rudd said, I think it's outrageous to consider proroguing Parliament. We are not Stuart kings. Can they stay in cabinet?
I think that a few people will have to think very deeply about whether or not they will stay in cabinet. I think there will be some resignations, and I think that Boris Johnson was very, thought that he was being very bold. He has been very bold, but that boldness may come back to bite him. And if he goes into a general election, it may bite him even deeper than it did Theresa May.
You bring me to my final question quite brilliantly, because, and it's the question to both of you. I mean, the stakes, they could not be any higher after this move for Boris Johnson. If it succeeds, well, it succeeds for him. If he fails here, if they face him down somehow, he is wounded now, permanently going forward, is he not?
Well, the stakes have always been high. This is a premiership that has staked its legitimacy, its life on delivering that Brexit. And everyone who joined the cabinet was signing up to that project. They knew what they were getting in for. Actually, most MPs should know what they were getting in for. When they voted for Article 50, that puts no deal as the legal default. And unless they vote for a deal, we leave with
Dawn Foster,
no deal.
brief final word from you.
I think that we are definitely looking at a general election. I think Boris Johnson may regret this, and I think that he may regret this even more than Theresa May regretted calling an election in 2017.